Hey, before we get started, I want to thank one of our brand new podcast supporters, Cody Martin. Cody decided to become a Patreon supporter of the podcast, which means he supports the podcast financially on a monthly basis. So, Cody, I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate everybody else who has become a supporter, whether that's through Patreon or just through a one-time donation. But really, I just appreciate everybody listening. It means a ton. The listens, the nice emails y'all send, and the comments on social media, and the kind iTunes reviews. It's more than I ever expected. So can't tell you how much it means. And I'm going to keep cranking out good episodes for you. Thanks so much. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Chandra Brown. Chandra is an educator, writer, and river guide who has worked on the West's most iconic rivers, including many seasons below the rim of the Grand Canyon. She's also the founder of the Freeflow Institute, a unique Montana-based program that offers multi-day river trips for writers and creatives that combine immersion in the natural world with instruction from some of the West's most well-known, prolific outdoor writers. By combining creativity with adventure in some of the West's most spectacular landscapes, Freeflow helps to eliminate the barrier between artist and environment, resulting in creative inspiration and an increased desire to preserve our wild places. Growing up in Alaska, Chandra has always had a close connection to the land and life in the outdoors. It was during a family trip to Montana during high school that she fell in love with rivers. Since then, rivers have played a foundational role in both her personal and professional lives. She attended college in Bozeman, studied in Ecuador as a Fulbright Scholar, and spent extensive time on rivers in both places. Currently, she burns the candle at both ends, teaching high school Spanish during the school year and guiding rivers in the summer, all while working as a freelance writer and building the Freeflow Institute from the ground up. Thanks to her love of books, writing, adventure, and conservation, Chandra is a perfect guest for this podcast. We cover a lot in just over an hour, including the genesis of the idea for the Freeflow Institute and how she turned that idea into a reality. We talk about some of the well-known writers who teach on Freeflow trips, including Hal Herring, Chris Dombrowski, and past podcast guests Alexis Bonagovsky and Brendan Leonard. We talk about lessons learned from her time in Ecuador, her creative process for writing, and her own writing heroes and mentors. We discuss conservation, adventure, and of course, her favorite books, films, and locations in the West. Chandra is an amazing woman who's pursuing her passions with an amazing amount of focus and determination, and she's created something very special in the Freeflow Institute. Check out the episode notes for links to everything, including a short film that gives an excellent overview of the project. Hope you enjoy. When you meet somebody for the first time and they ask you, what do you do? How do you generally answer that question?
I feel like my answer to that question fluctuates with the seasons, but I think first and foremost, I identify myself as an educator.
Yep.
And so I spent much of my life teaching other people in a variety of different settings and classrooms. So on the river and informal classrooms, and I also am trying out calling myself a writer without any sort of qualifications or disclaimers prior to that statement. And that's been feeling pretty good lately, the last few years. And a river guide. I mean, through and through, I'm a bit of a river rat.
That's great. And I think when you combine all three of those, I don't want to talk in detail about all three of those, but maybe the best place to start is the combination of those three with the Freeflow Institute, because that's how we were kind of introduced. Somebody turned me on to your program, your coworker, Stephanie. And so I'd love to hear, maybe we can start with you just talking a bit about Freeflow and the program and how that came into being.
Yeah, for sure. So Freeflow Institute's just a couple years old. We ran our first pilot season in summer of 2018. And the whole idea here came to me via a good friend who is now an advisor to the Freeflow Institute. But he came back after a week up at the Banff Filmmakers Festival or workshop, and he was like, Chandra, I've got this great idea, and I think this is a way to fuse sort of all of your professional affections into one project. And so the idea, truth be told, wasn't mine, but I snagged it and ran with it. And so the whole idea is to get, thinking people, creative people, innovators out into wild spaces and afford them space and time and guidance to bring their ideas to fruition. And at the end of the day, we're hoping to empower advocates for wild spaces with words and community. So right now, the Freeflow Institute, coming into its second season, is offering primarily multi-day river trips that are led by an amazing host of prolific and successful writers that sort of offer their guidance and their tutelage in such an amazing venue, any number of Western rivers.
That's really a great description of it. And the thing is, lots of people have great ideas, but taking it from an idea that's just rattling around in your head to reality is a whole different deal. So, from the time that you and your colleague kind of threw that idea around until the time you started it, started the season last year. I mean, how long was that, and what was the process like of making this idea into a reality? Because that seemed, it just seems like quite a challenge and quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, thanks. It's definitely still in process, and sometimes it's hard to remember and hard to acknowledge that it actually is happening, because it's something of a dream. It's just the notion of taking people downstream on a river trip and working on writing and having these incredible revelatory conversations along the way. It's like, oh, we're doing that, that seems still, I still sometimes have a hard time acknowledging that it's real. So I guess the process was mostly, I just got a business license and started begging my really smart friends to help me with the pieces that I didn't understand.
Yep.
Super talented entrepreneurs, and just kind of picking their brains. I built a website and then called on two wonderful and courageous and flexible writers that were just keen to try it out. And that's, last year that was William DeBuise and Hal Herring. And they were super keen. And, both Bill and Hal have ample wilderness experience. And so they weren't going to be flustered by the chaos of a river trip and trying to make this, facilitate this fusion of a classic river trip and a writing seminar workshop. And we just tried it, and it works so well. We're going to just keep doing it.
That's really cool. And I don't know Hal Herring personally, but I've read a lot of his work, and a lot of people that I've met through this podcast seem to have a connection with him. And he seems like a super cool guy, and I'm sure Bill is as well. I'm not as familiar with him, but can you talk a little bit about Hal and his work and kind of what he brought to that trip? Because maybe I'm attracted to him because we have the same accent. That's probably why.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. And that is fair. I could sit and listen to Hal Herring talk for hours on end. And a lot of that is that accent, enamored of that accent. But, he's a bit of an icon here in the West and in Montana. He lives not so very far from where I am here in Missoula. He's a contributing editor at Field and Stream magazine. He's written extensively for High Country News. He's written a book about guns. And one of the things that I love about Hal is he doesn't subscribe to any one political ideology.
Yep.
And that makes him incredibly dynamic. He's unpredictable in the things that he believes, in the things he will get behind. He's a conservationist, he's a hunter, he's an angler. He does that podcast for the backcountry hunters and anglers.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And he interviews some really fascinating characters on there. And again, it's just an opportunity to listen to him talk. But so that trip that Hal ran last year was on the Missouri River with a little side trip to the American Prairie Reserve. And it was a little nichey. It was aimed toward journalists, working journalists and students of journalism that wanted to, study with Hal and talk about how to tell a good story and how to talk about place and the issues within places that are important to us here. That was a great trip.
Yeah, and I think the way you described him, that he doesn't really subscribe to any one particular ideology, I would guess that's so important in a trip like this, just kind of an open-minded person. And I know that this summer you've got two past guests from my show, Brendan Leonard and Alexis Bonigovsky, coming, and they seem to fit that description as well. They just both super, super smart, but think about things in their own way and have opinions that may be surprising to somebody who wants to box somebody in. And I mean, is that obviously you're looking for good writers, but is that kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, flexibility or the ability to think outside a box, something you look for as well in these instructors?
Oh yeah. I think it's gotta be a priority, when we're considering who would be a good facilitator for these trips. I mean, one, you got to, just like Hal, just like Bill, you've got to be comfortable with the discomfort of being away from the predictable, right? Mm-hmm. Like out anyone that spends any time outside, away from creature comforts, knows that you've got to be flexible, and I think that characteristic of flexibility and adaptability also has to be reflected in the way you interact with your participants and with your co-instructors and with the environment itself. And then you take that a step further and someone like Hal or Brendan or Alexis, and I have actually yet to meet Brendan or Alexis, but just through reading their work and their conversations, you can't be too attached to any one outcome or any one ideology. And I think that's something you learn in working with people within an educational setting too. As soon as you start erecting these walls that are the constructs meant to protect your perceptions, your beliefs, your ideologies, you kill your curiosity, and then you in turn kill curiosity of your students.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I would guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but in my experience on some of these wilderness trips, like I did a semester in Knowles during college, and then I've done a few different, longer climbing trips around, and being out there in the wilderness and having this shared goal and having to kind of watch out for each other, it seems to break down a lot of maybe barriers that in the real world would cause trouble, like political opinions or things like that. Because I've been on climbing trips before, and my tent mate has been people that have kind of extreme right-wing views, which is not really how I align, but we're able to get past that because every day we have to get on a rope together and look out for each other. And so I would guess that being able to knock down those barriers helps with the creative process as well. Am I anywhere near the truth there?
Oh, I think you're spot on. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the beauties of, I mean, whether you're climbing, whether, you're backpacking, and whether you're on a river trip, it's like that outdoor experience, that removal from modernity, the removal from the familiar is the great equalizer. Mm-hmm. It's like we are, and I work in the summertime, I work these 14, 15-day river trips in the Grand Canyon. And I just am always amazed at how hard we might try to maintain our sort of external, like our shells, right? These constructs of ourselves, our perceptions of ourselves. We might try to maintain who we think we are above the rim, and once we get down there, and once we're on that river for 3, 4, 14 days, it's like that's all stripped away, and mm-hmm. the only thing that's left is the essential and the real and the authentic. And so yeah, I think then along those same lines, it's not just reductionist in nature. It's also you're in removing those layers and revealing the authentic self beneath those layers. You're also opening up a whole world of creativity and freedom that was maybe just lying dormant before.
Yeah, I'm such a huge fan of outdoor education or just outdoor experiences. Actually, in my podcast with Brendan, he told me about a book called The Nature Fix by Florence Williams. I think that's her name. And I'd never even heard of it. And he actually let me borrow his copy. And it's all about the many benefits, health benefits, psychological benefits, everything that comes from spending time in the outdoors. And it was stuff that I kind of had a gut feeling that I knew, but I never had any proof that like scientific proof that I was right. But that book was unbelievable for just showing all the reasons that nature is so good for us. But most of that was from an individual standpoint. And when you throw in the whole teamwork standpoint and group dynamics, it's a whole different deal. So yeah, I could talk about that all day, but you keep dropping all these kind of tidbits that make me very interested in your background. So I want to go ahead and talk about you. And I know a little bit, but like the Grand Canyon and that kind of thing. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Alaska, in the Matanuska Valley, just north of Anchorage.
Okay. And so how did you end up there? Had your family been there for a while, or did they move there? How did they end up in Alaska?
Yeah, my parents are both from Arizona. And back in the early 70s, my dad was working for the U.S. Geological Survey, and he was doing ice surveys up in Barrow above the Arctic Circle. And so he and my mom moved up there, and they built a house near the Matanuska River in, I think, 1972. And then he's going to be up there forever. My mom has since moved away, but she, and I think she was pretty glad to leave Alaska after 30 years up there. But my dad's still there, and he built the house that I grew up in.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. So growing up there, I mean, when you look at your life now that's so deeply connected to the outdoors and creativity, I mean, Are there any experiences you look back on and think, that kind of laid the groundwork for what I'm doing today? Or was it just kind of a constant stream of experiences your whole life?
I think that an Alaskan childhood is just so unique and so different. I'm so grateful for my parents' decision to have their family there, to start their family there. My brother and I just had so much freedom. We grew up on 10 acres that were surrounded by more wilderness, in all kinds of directions. And we didn't have nearby neighbors. And so my brother and I would we'd spend a lot of time outside doing things like building forts and going on these expeditions, these little adventures where we'd be gone for hours at a time, looking for bugs, looking for, critters in the woods. So I think that freedom was just really unique, and we were encouraged to take a lot of risks. Not all of them calculated or supervised. And, and I just remember, my dad just encouraging us to go out and work with his tools and drive the tractor around and sort of learn through our mistakes. And some of them were, admittedly pretty painful, but, I also remember the darkness in the wintertime, and my dad had these kerosene lamps and a generator, and our power would go out often when we were young, and I just remember that darkness sort of creating something of a cocoon.
Sure.
And and in that cocoon, we did our things, as a little family of four, and I think those explorations and the time on the water, my family wasn't into anything, nothing adrenaline laced, that we didn't grow up really, downhill skiing. I didn't learn to downhill ski until I went to college, but we grew up on the ocean fishing for halibut and on the banks of the rivers fishing for salmon. Grew up playing hockey, and my mom had this beautiful vegetable garden that was huge and, conveniently the size of a hockey rink. So in the wintertime, it would turn into a hockey rink. And, I have nothing but affection for my childhood in Alaska.
And so when did rivers enter your life? Because obviously it's such a huge part now. Was that later on, or was it up there in Alaska? When did that kind of get into your blood and become such a focus?
Yeah. So, we spent a lot of time on these big silty salmon rivers in Alaska, and their tributaries. They're clearwater tributaries, and mostly what we were doing was fishing, a little bit of canoeing, and we spent a lot of time, like I said, on the ocean. And I really think that the first time I ever went like whitewater rafting was in Montana on a family trip. I was probably 16, and that was in the Middle Fork of the Flathead, just outside Glacier National Park.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Oh yeah, it's gorgeous, and it's warm, and that's different than what we grew up with. It's a totally different relationship with the water, and I think, and that was transformative for sure. It was just a day trip, and I was like, man, this is cool. Where you actually want the water to splash you, and actively avoiding.
Well, it's funny that you say that you remember that as being warm, because I think when I was 16, I went on my first Western rafting trip, and all I could think was how cold it was coming from Eastern North Carolina.
Oh, yeah. Oh, totally. It just all depends on that perspective.
That's right. And so where did you end up going to college?
Yeah. So I ended up going to college in Bozeman, Montana.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. For a brief moment there, kind of at the urging of a high school guidance counselor, I was set to go to a military academy.
Were you really? Which one?
I was nominated to West Point and then later to the Air Force Academy. And
wow.
Yeah, which is super interesting to think back on. And I, at some point my senior year of high school, I was like, wait. No, this can't be my future. And I think it would have been a really interesting future.
Sure.
It would have, and certainly would have had a top-notch education and no debt. But instead I chose to go to Bozeman and ski a bunch, and I still got a great education, but I also spent 6.5 years in undergrad. And
well, that's the thing is it'd be easy to do there in Bozeman because there's just so many cool things to do. I mean, I think Boulder, until Boulder got so expensive, I think that would probably be one of the coolest college towns. But now that you have to be like a billionaire to live in Boulder, I think Bozeman wins. I mean, that place, whatever you want to do, you can do it there. I mean, it's just spectacular.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's, it gets as much sunshine every year as Houston, Texas. And so it's really hard. It was really hard being an Alaskan kid getting there and like, oh man, it's sunny again. I certainly cannot go sit in a lecture hall. I must be outside. And it was like a strange, like visceral compulsion. I became a terrible student when I got to Bozeman.
What were your distractions there? I mean, what were you doing? What kind of outdoor stuff were you doing that just because there's just so many things to choose from. Were you on the river a lot, fishing? I mean, what kind of stuff were you doing?
Yeah, I had grown up sort of cross country skiing, and then in Bozeman, I realized how much fun it is to succumb to gravity and go downhill on skis and instead of fighting it. And so I was skiing as much as I could and working at Bridger Bowl as a lift operator.
Nice.
Kind of living the classic like Bozeman dream. And, and so I was really distracted by that lifestyle. And, I just wanted to get outside and hike and ride my bicycle. And you, like you said, you can do that there any day of the year. You can get outside.
Well, you obviously, laid a good foundation there because then you went on to get a Fulbright, correct?
Yeah.
So how did that come about? Because that's big time, Fulbright.
Yeah, I feel really, really lucky. That was a cool year. So I graduated from Bozeman and kind of had that classic undergraduate indecision, and that's why it took me so long. I switched my major half a dozen times and ended up with a degree in Spanish and a degree in art, and I ended up getting back up to Alaska for a few years and teaching high school up there. And I've never really been able to spend more than a few years doing the same thing, and I started to get itchy feet. So I was like, well, I'd really like to go to Ecuador and spend some time on those rivers and collect some stories. And so I applied for a Fulbright, and they gave it to me. And so I left that teaching job and went down to Ecuador and lived in a town called Latacunga, which is a couple hours south of the capital, Quito, way up high in the Andes. And yeah, kind of explored volcanoes and then explored jungle rivers and gosh, I owe so much to that experience.
Yeah. So what did you get out of that? Because my wife and I lived in Costa Rica for a year right after we got married, and I'd never really been anywhere or spent any significant time internationally anywhere. I'd been on some trips like in the mountains in different countries, but it was not like a cultural experience. And I was 31 when we lived in Costa Rica for a year, and it dramatically changed my perspective on things. I mean, I'd call that one of the most formative experiences of my life. And so how were you different when you left Ecuador than you were when you got there?
God, such a good question. What can I ask you what you were doing in Costa Rica?
So I tell people I was a professional surfer and my wife was my sponsor.
Yeah.
She got a job with her whole career has been in international development, and she got a job down there, and it was 2009, and it was when the real estate market had crashed, and she had always wanted to live internationally but thought it wouldn't work with my career. And so with the economy in the toilet, and luckily I'd gotten a scholarship to grad school, so I didn't have any debt. We were like, man, let's do it. Let's go. Why not? So we spent a year down there, and I did a lot of volunteer work, but mostly surfing, which was awesome.
Awesome. That it's important to have a sponsor these days.
Yes, you got to have a sponsor. I was professional. I had that on my LinkedIn profile for a while, but I decided to take it off.
Yeah. I love that.
But it was so formative, and it changed my whole perspective on, consumerism, on just the way that Americans are perceived around the world. And Costa Rica, as far as developing countries go, is pretty nice. It's not like that different of a place, but it was so formative. So what did you think?
Oh yeah. When I got that Fulbright, I was one of the oldest grantees in my cohort, which sort of ushered in a bit of insecurity about, here I am. And, I remember being in the embassy for the grantee orientation in Quito that first week of my grant year, and just being surrounded by these brilliant minds, like super creative kids. And I wasn't that much older, I think I was 29. But I definitely felt concerned about, I felt like competitive with them. Like, what are they going to do? What are their projects?
Sure.
Like, what are they going to get out of this experience that I'm not? And one of the cool things about the Fulbright is that, at least back then, was that you could be completely autonomous, and there wasn't a whole lot of direct supervision. And so once you got going, and once you kind of found your stride in your community and your projects started taking shape, it just felt like there was a lot of room for creativity and sort of, self-direction and self-correction too. But that also meant that, there was a lot of there was a pretty steep learning curve. So I was working at a university, a public university in Latacunga. And I guess one of the biggest lessons that I still just hold so close to my heart is this idea of, patience is always going to, at the end of the day, win every battle.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you ran into this in Costa Rica too. This sort of the effects of that polychronism, this perception of time that's totally antithetical to our North American notion of forward progress always.
Yes.
And so, it kind of is manifest in the inefficiency and the lack of punctuality and the seeming disrespect of time. And that was always really frustrating for me, because I am very goal driven, and I love to check things off of my list. And I like to say that was a productive day because I accomplished X, Y, and Z. And in Ecuador, that's not on anyone's radar.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me was really challenging. But the more time that I spent there, and the more work that I did there, and the more people I interacted with, the more I saw that the flip side of that inefficiency was this obsession or just cultural, the priority was in the quality of the work and the being with others rather than the doing of the work and the checking off of the goal off the list. And so again, that kind of comes back to what we were talking about before, this flexibility and awareness of the value of doing less, and the value of discussion and face-to-face interactions and slow, deliberate, sometimes inefficient movement through the world.
And that's funny you say that, because I feel like I learned that exact same thing in my experience there, and I hadn't really ever thought about it in those exact terms, but I definitely walked away with that. I mean, I was coming out of an MBA, where that's as American as you can get as far as, cranking through stuff, efficiency, the whole, all about the bottom line. And then you go there and it's so refreshing. This is kind of a generalization, but when you looked at the average citizen down there and compared them to average American citizen, did they seem happier or did they seem more or less content than Americans? Because in my experience at Costa Rica, they seemed so much more content, especially the children, because I did a lot of volunteer work with kids, and they just all seemed so much happier than American kids, even though they had just a fraction of the wealth. And I don't know if you shared that experience or not, but I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. And I wonder sometimes if it's, it is a big generalization, but I wonder sometimes if it's a function, that happiness or that contentment is a function of just being okay with where you're at and what you've got, and maybe just a like a lesser extent, chasing ambitions and chasing social constructs and trying to meet those milestones.
Yeah, it's a fine line between the ambition and what the happiness aspect. That's interesting. I could talk to you about that stuff all day because that was such a. Had you traveled much internationally before you did that? The Fulbright?
Yeah. Not as. I had lived in Spain for a while in my undergrad on an exchange, and I had traveled to Central America and Mexico. But that was the farthest south I'd ever been.
Yeah, I loved it. And my wife and I try to get down there every so often, and it's special in down there. It's very good kind of reality check, I think, for me to go down there and kind of see things other than the United States every now and then. So when did writing become such a focus in your life?
I feel like I've always been something of a writer, or at least I've always done it, with or without that label of writer.
Sure.
And so I guess, it was mostly a hobby and then a dream, when you think about the thing you'd most want to do if you could do anything. I'd always dream about having adventures and writing about them. And I suppose that when I was thinking about graduate school, I was really thinking about storytelling, but with an eye toward ethnography. And I was really interested in the anthropology of environments. So I was looking at graduate school, but with the intention of doing a lot of writing and hopefully, getting into that environmental anthropology realm. And I ended up bowing out of that PhD track with the environmental anthropology focus and just sort of stopping after a master's degree in environmental writing.
Got it. And what caused you to make that decision? Because a PhD is such an endurance test, and why did you decide to go after, to take a break from that or step away from that?
Yeah, that was a really hard decision to make. And I think, I feel like so much of it had to do with, timing. I was just really ready to, stop moving around so much.
Sure.
And be the place I ended up in. I went to graduate school in Missoula after being out of Montana for a really long time. And I got back to Missoula, and maybe the first time in my life, I just felt an incredible urge to stop and stay. And the two programs that I was looking at for this PhD were, one was in Providence, Rhode Island, the other one was Palo Alto, California. And I just felt that I was at a place in my life where I wasn't willing to trade the place for the study. And so I stayed.
Good for you. And Missoula is, that is one of the coolest places around, as you well know. And I think that takes guts to make a stand like that on when you've got different opportunities. That can be a hard choice to make. And so how long have you been in Missoula now?
Yeah, it's crazy. 4 years.
Oh, wow.
I moved here in 2014. Yeah, 20. Oh, wow. So 5 years, 5 years almost now.
And so you're also a teacher. You've got so much going on, and it's all so cool. So can you talk about teaching?
Yeah, for sure. Teaching's kind of been the staple for me. It's been a really nice balance, sort of a counterpoint to the dirtbag guiding lifestyle. I've taught Spanish at the high school level, and then adjuncted, sort of adjunct work at the university as well. And so that's been such a source of stability and inspiration for me for, ever since about 2007, off and on.
And so has it generally the kind of the flow of things been teach during the school year and then guide during the summers? Has that generally been how it has worked?
Totally.
And
yeah.
When did you start guiding in the Grand Canyon?
This will be my 4th season in the Grand Canyon coming up.
Wow. So when I was in high school, my dad and I did a rafting trip down the Grand Canyon with Western River Expeditions.
Yeah.
And that was my first time going anywhere west of the Mississippi. And I mean, that was one of the coolest trips I've ever been on. And I think it's what planted the seed for really my whole career.
Cool.
Can you just talk a little bit about your connection to the Grand Canyon? Because several of my podcast guests just go, that they talk about the Grand Canyon as being the most important place in their lives. Like I've had Pete McBride on, his whole career is basically based around the Grand Canyon. And then the author Hampton Sides, he said that's his favorite place in the American West. I think Brendan Leonard said it's his favorite place. What does it mean to you?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's an easy place to claim as your favorite. That's for certain. Like I said, my parents are from Arizona. My dad grew up in Prescott, which is not so far from the Grand Canyon. And I remember going there as a kid and visiting and just being completely baffled by that place, and then learning later on that you can float down that river in rafts, and just feeling really kind of just intrigued, of course, as most humans are, by the Grand Canyon. And I guess for a long time, I've been guiding my entire adult life. And I feel like it was always sort of up high in the sky career goal when it came to guiding. And I think it is for a lot of river guides. And after, my last season in Alaska, I just decided I wanted to be warm. And and man, I'll tell you what, July in Grand Canyon, you can be warm.
Yes. That's great. So, I think guiding obviously is just this dream job, but the reality is it's extremely hard work. And on top of just the physical nature of it, you're dealing with clients and there are all these different personalities. And so I guess what lessons, are there any lessons you've learned from guiding and from dealing with clients and dealing with personalities that you've been able to apply to other parts of your life? Because I would imagine there are lessons there that have carried over to teaching and have carried over to Freeflow and then vice versa as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that I always try to keep in mind when we go on those longer trips in the Grand Canyon and everything's hot and everything's sandy and people are perpetually dehydrated, and is just the sort of fragility of our emotions when we feel beat down by elements, and how important it is to be careful with our words and careful with our bodies as you move through that river corridor and through that like prickly and pretty spicy landscape. Mm-hmm. But also to really protect the integrity of the group by being careful with your words and your actions.
Yeah, that is the deal. That's what I learned on Knowles. They always talked about expedition behavior. And my course, we were out there for 3 months, and it was 9 guys between the age of 18 and like 22. So just very, very full of testosterone. And, there was there were a few breaking points along the way, but all good lessons learned. So talking more about writing and, your personal experience writing, and then all the time you've spent with both, well-known writers and then aspiring writers and people that love to write. When you, I'm always very interested in just kind of the creative process and how that works. And when you look at all these writers, whether they're well known or not, but just kind of prolific writers and people who writing is a big part of their life, would you say that the secret is more innate inborn talent, or is it hard work? Which one matters more with writing?
Oh man.
Or is it both? Could be both.
Yeah. Well, I mean, no doubt that talent is that's a bonus if you're trying to be a writer and you're good at it.
Yeah.
Like, I think, that's great. And so there is tremendous talent in the community of writers that I've been, so fortunate to work within and operate within. And it's marvelous, and it's hard. Sometimes I'm just amazed at the ideas that these people are able to put down on paper. But then I think with any sort of work, with any sort of, prolonged endeavor, the talent has to be coupled with tenacity and discipline and dedication. And so, I would be hard pressed to name one writer that I'm acquainted with who's not fiercely dedicated to their craft.
Yeah. And that's one of the common themes that comes up with any writers is that discipline. And I think Brendan is one of the guys that really has made a point of making sure everybody understands that it's, it is hard work and it is discipline. And that book he wrote called Make It Till You Make It. I don't know if you've read that, but it's, 40 myths and truths about creativity. And I love that book just because he makes it clear, like, you just got to do it. I mean, you can have all the talent in the world, but if you're not doing it consistently, it's not going to go anywhere, which I think is kind of refreshing, that you can work, you got to have talent, but you also need to work hard, and you can control the work. You can't control inborn talent. That's
right. And I feel like, as with any skill set, as long as you have that drive to develop, your abilities, you can start with the tiniest spark of innate talent, I feel. And maybe talent in this case is synonymous with just desire. Mm-hmm. And then if you put your time in and you work hard, I mean, I would imagine it's just like learning anything else, a sport, a discipline. It just takes persistence.
So with your personal writing, when you sit down to write, do you have any routines you go through or any specific way you go about it, or like a specific time of day or a specific amount of time you sit down and commit to writing? Or what does it look like when you sit down to write? Because whenever I sit down to write, all of a sudden I have about 100 different things that I need to be doing, like cleaning the house or, mowing the grass or something. I can come up with any excuse not to just sit there. And so What does it look like for you?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's spot on, Ed. I mean, it's just the first and foremost, it's mitigation of the urge to do dishes. I hate doing dishes, but all of a sudden, man, those dishes have got to get washed. Yeah. Or sweeping all the ghost dogs out of the corner, they've been there for weeks. They can sit there a little bit longer. I think accumulation of dog fur, but for me, and right now, and maybe, ever since I got out of grad school, the persistent challenge is just freeing up time. And so for me, when I want to write and when I need to write, I get up really early, before 5 a.m. And then that's when it's quiet, and that's when my mind is still fresh, this time of day. At the end of a day of teaching, it's there's not much unique or creative or original thought that's coming out of my brain.
Were you up at 4:30 this morning?
Yeah, I was.
You're a machine.
Yeah, I'm a morning person. And then, 8:30, I'm ready for bed. So, and socially, this is hard. But yeah, I like to get up early, and I on mornings when I write, I just try to get something down, something other than emails or content or, God forbid, lesson plans, like something creative and something for a project. And I guess I try to, because I'm pretty spread out, I try to keep little notebooks everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I carry a notebook with me all the time, and then I just try to keep them hidden in strategic places, various bags and whatnot. And then I guess when it comes to the arrangement and alignment of words and ideas, I love like sticky notes and colors, and I like to be able to just spread out and move things around physically until they make sense, until I can see them taking form in a paragraph or a page.
That's really cool. I love hearing that, because I have a lot of different, obviously writers and then different artists, and the techniques are so different. And so I think that's one of these things where, I can ask you that, and maybe somebody's listening who wants to be a writer and they'll try that. But it seems like from all these people I've spoken to that the system is not as important. The individual system is not as important as actually just having your system.
Yeah.
It's, everybody's going to be different, but I think in the end, you just need to have a system that you can stick to. It seems to be the commonality so far.
Absolutely. Yeah. And and that question that you just asked me is one of my favorite questions to ask anyone who excels at what they do. What does your day to day look like? Walk me through your morning, let me know about your systems, because that's so revealing of, the structure of a life that leads to, good work.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's some book, I haven't read it, but somebody told me to read it, called like Morning Routines, I think. And it follows several different, lists out several different creatives and goes through kind of what they do in the morning. I'll put a link to it on the website, but I need to read that because I'm so interested in that. And speaking of you asking people about their routines and reading and authors, who do you look up to in the literary world? I mean, you could either know them, or it could be somebody who died 100 years ago, but you love their work. Do you have any kind of mentors or heroes in the literary world?
Oh man, so many, so many. One of my heroes, that I'm super lucky that I get to live just a couple towns away from him, is of course David James Duncan.
Mm-hmm.
I read The River Why in high school, and it quickly became, an obsession for me. And I guess, I was lucky enough to take a writing course from him.
Oh, really?
In 2016 when I was in school.
Wow.
And he's remained something. I mean, he's accessible. He returns emails. We converse. He's supportive. And he's actually agreed to do a Freeflow trip in 2020.
Really? That's huge.
That's huge. And I remember at this, to backtrack a moment, I remember at that writing workshop that I did with him through the University of Montana, we had to submit a manuscript, and my manuscript was about working in the Grand Canyon, and he wrote a little note on there that said something like, "Oh, well, we are cousins," kind of kind of referring to our shared love for rivers. And I just melted, and I was like, yeah, I'm David James Duncan's cousin. And so, just the way that he is able to translate like the physical poetry of rivers with words into his, singular prose. It's amazing. So I would say he's a hero. I guess I have some amazing and talented friends who continually astound me with their capacity. Some of them are well known in their circles, but for the most part, these are just creative, ambitious individuals, scientists, educators, athletes, activists. Feel really fortunate to be surrounded by incredible group of human beings in my day-to-day life.
I think that's so important. I think being able to get that energy from other people, other creative people, and even if you're not in the same field, just the merely being in the presence of other creative people makes such a difference. I think you mentioned how he wrote on your paper that you're cousins, and I was listening to a podcast recently with Chris Dombrowski. Is that how you say his last name?
Yeah.
And he's going to be one of your instructors, right?
This coming summer.
Yeah, and he just seemed like the coolest guy. And he's a poet, and he writes about rivers and fishing. And he was talking about how he got a nod from Duncan at some point, and how what a huge boost that was to him. So it sounds like he's just such a generous guy, and has made such a difference in so many writers' lives. That's really cool to hear.
Oh, super cool. It's super cool. Yeah. I mean, you hold someone like David on a pedestal, artistically and just, he is an absolute hero, literary hero. And then to have him acknowledge your tiny little, spark of promise, you're like, you cling to it, And I know that that David really has a strong respect for Chris Dombrowski too. They've got a really cool sort of relationship.
I wanted to read his book, the Body of Water book, and after hearing him talk, because he just seemed like such a cool guy, but I went to Amazon and it was sold out because he was on Stephen Rinella's podcast, and so I'm sure he got quite the boost in Amazon sales. But as soon as that thing's back in stock, I'm going to read it because it sounds really awesome.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. Because like you said, he's a poet, and he's taken this, this topic, which could be a little too nichey, like fishing for bonefish in the Bahamas, and he's made it into something incredibly readable and incredibly appealing. It's a beautiful book.
I will check it out. My list just gets longer and longer after talking to folks like you. There's just so many good books out there. So at the beginning, I want to circle back to one thing you said as part of the Freeflow mission, you trying to connect people to nature and that conservation ethic. And this is probably a hard question, but when you think about, all the time you spent on rivers around the world, really, but when you think about the West and you think about conservation, what is there a specific issue that comes to your mind, something you've seen that is of concern, a big conservation concern that you think may be could be a problem in the future, something that needs to be addressed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a lot of my work has been pretty river centric and actually pretty focused on dams. And, that's a big, it's a big point of interest for me. I really like to look into, our, not just here in this country, but globally, like what compels us to continue building dams? What compels us to dismantle old dams? What do dams mean for like the nostalgia of a culture, And so I've done quite a bit of reading and research and work, looking into the Snake and Columbia River system. And for me, this remains, and is getting, one thing I'm really happy about is this is finally getting a lot of press and attention in the mainstream media, is this, the dwindling salmon population in the Snake Columbia River system, and how salmon as sort of magical indicators and facilitators of ecological connectivity are slowly disappearing, or maybe not even slowly disappearing. And then as a function of that, we're losing members of the southern resident orca population, and we're noticing and massive changes in the headwaters with regard to the ecological functioning in these mountain tributaries. And so, to kind of zoom out, I think that to me, this habitat fragmentation and ecosystem fragmentation, whether it's riverine or terrestrial, that seems to me to be, if we could put a label on sort of an umbrella issue that seems to worry me the most, I think it would be that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I deal a lot with water and water rights and in my job. And it is unbelievably complex. And the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know anything. Are there any books on that subject, or even articles or web resources that stick out in your head? If somebody wanted to learn more, they could go and check that out.
Yeah, specifically on the snake in Colombia.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there are a number of books. Stephen Hawley, Hawley, he another good friend of, or maybe apprentice of sorts, of David James Duncan. He wrote a really nice book about that, and I can't recall the name of it right now.
I'll find it and put it on. In the notes.
Yeah, definitely. And he actually just made a documentary too, which I think will be released soon, called "Damned to Extinction," about that same river system.
Oh, cool.
I haven't seen it, but probably worth checking out. There's a book called "A River Lost," and I can't recall the author of that book, but I'm sure you could find that too. And that's sort of a historical look at the dams in that river system, and sort of their, why they're there and why they're still there, and what they mean, to the future health of the system and for the populations in the human populations in that area too.
Yeah, I mentioned my wife doing international development work, and that was a lot of what she would do. And I think like in Brazil and places like that, where these companies would come in and start building dams, and they would just clear out these populations of people, generally extremely, extremely poor people, and flood towns.
Yeah.
And so it's not just in other, in a lot of developing countries, it's an environmental issue, but it's also a human rights issue, which a lot of people don't understand.
Oh yeah, totally.
Well, we're coming up on both of our bedtimes, I think. and I can't believe I just looked at the timer. We've been talking for 59 minutes, wow. Which is wild. So I've got some kind of quick questions that I like to run through with everybody. And so can we go through those? Do you have time to go through those real quick?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So thinking about all the books you've read, you've obviously very, very well read. Are there any books that stick out in your head as your favorite books about the American West?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, for sure. So many, but I guess I'm biased toward this that John McPhee book called "Coming into the Country," about his explorations in Alaska in the 70s. Mm-hmm. That's a good one. That's a great one.
And I would guess from your perspective too, just anything McPhee is just such a good thing to read as far as instruction on how to write. He's the master.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's no better teacher than a McPhee book if you just want to. I mean, his sentences are perfectly crafted, and he's a master by all definitions.
And what's your favorite book of all time, if you have one?
Oh, wow. So I really love Wade Davis. I don't know if you heard of him.
I saw him speak one time, and he was super cool. I met him. He was so cool.
He's super cool. Yeah, he's great. He's Canadian ethnobotanist and anthropologist. So anything by Wade Davis. But I love the book that he wrote about the sort of the use of plants in the Amazon basin, called One River. It's a beautiful book. It reads like fiction, but it's just loaded with facts and history and numbers. And then I think, it's fiction and it's far from the American West, but 100 Years of Solitude by Garcia Marquez is probably my number one favorite book of all time.
I've never read that, but my wife has read it and loves it.
It's beautiful.
That's cool. I need to read that. I have a problem reading. I can't read fiction for some reason. I get real antsy, like I'm not learning anything. And I know that's stupid and it's not true because you can learn a lot from fiction, but I've got a mental block on that. I need to work on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's super common. And we're so limited on the number of hours that we can dedicate to reading. I mean, we have to pick and choose. But I think it's good for the spirit to read some fiction every once in a while.
I agree completely. Do you have any favorite films or documentaries?
I guess kind of an oldie but a goodie is that that film Baraka that came out a number of years ago. It's just an amalgamation of images from across the world. And then one, coming back to Hal Herring, that film that he was in, that David Byers produced a couple years ago about the Malheur and the Bundy debacle called No Man's Land. I just would love to put a little plug in for that film. If people haven't seen it, it's fantastic. Super unique perspective.
I have not seen that, so I'm going to look that up and I'll put links to it. You've obviously got an extremely full life from 4:30 in the morning until bedtime every day. But other than rivers and writing and all the great stuff you do, are there any other hobbies you have? Is there anything kind of weird or interesting that you would do that might be surprising for the listeners? Like I learned how to knit one time and I still do it sometimes.
Oh, that's a super useful hobby.
Yeah. Well, I kind of do it like frantically and just I guess they're supposed to be scarves, but it's really just something to keep me busy if I have to sit still. So I wouldn't say I'm talented, but I can do it.
A cure for the idle hands.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's great. I suppose, skiing, kayaking, and playing with my canine friend, Arlo. And then I guess, surprising, I just love live music. I don't know if that's surprising, but I spend far too many dollars annually on flying around the country to see shows.
Who's your favorite? Who do you go see a lot?
Oh, I hope this doesn't, plunge me into a pigeonhole, but I just love, you'll understand and appreciate this, I imagine. I just love Widespread Panic. Oh
yeah. That was the soundtrack of high school and college for me.
Yeah.
They've got staying power too. I mean, it's unbelievable the career they've had.
It is amazing.
They're the modern day Grateful Dead.
Oh, totally.
Them and Fish. I mean, they're a little different than Fish. I mean, they're a lot different from Fish, but I feel like Fish and Widespread it's unbelievable what the careers they've been able to have. Whether you like the music or not, you got to respect their careers. I mean, it's amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when you think about all these outdoor experiences you have had, is there one that comes to mind that you would say is the most powerful outdoor experience you've ever had? And that could mean scary, funny, memorable. Is there one that sticks out in your mind?
There are so many. Lots of memories on from our boat in Alaska, like fishing for halibut, and then there was one time when I was really young and I was like, gosh, this has got to be a 350-pound halibut, and we get it up takes us about an hour to reel the thing in, and we get it up to the swim platform of the boat. We got a little 28-foot bayliner, and it's just a little tiny halibut face, and my dad's like, "Oh, that's not right." And then we reel it in a little bit farther, and there's a damn sea lion that has attached itself to the lower half of that halibut. It's maybe a 15-pound halibut. And, and so then we've got a big old sea lion on our swim deck of this boat. And I just remember that as being one of the craziest, moments. And my dad's like firing off his 44 and my mom's screaming and there's water coming over the back of the boat. And I don't, and I just remember kind of letting go of the fishing pole and being like, I don't know what happens now, but something's got to change. And eventually that sea lion swam away and he won. He got the halibut.
Well, he deserved it. That's a tough sea lion. Holy, that's crazy. That is really crazy.
Yeah, weird stuff like that. I mean, that's what you get growing up in Alaska. You get weird experiences like that. And so it's hard to pinpoint, and identify one super powerful moment. There's all those sunsets in Grand Canyon too, and moonrises in Grand Canyon that somehow just amplify memories and somehow serve to connect you to the self that you are below the rim and everything that happens above it. And I think those are pretty powerful moments too.
Definitely. And that leads me to my next question, which you may have just answered. Your favorite location in the West, is it the Grand Canyon?
Again, I don't know if I could choose one place.
I couldn't pick one. I ask the question every time and I don't have an answer. So yeah, it's way too hard to pick one.
It's hard. And, but I would say, right now I'm really fond of where I live. I'm really drawn to confluences, sort of the meeting place of two rivers. And I'm lucky enough to live at a place that sits right at the confluence of two beautiful Montana rivers. And right now this is as close to my favorite spot as anything's ever been. That's
a good feeling. You're in the right spot. Definitely better than Providence, Rhode Island. I mean, nothing against Providence, Rhode Island, but it's not Missoula.
It's not Missoula.
When you think about, this is a hard question, but think about the best advice you've ever received. Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, I think there's one piece of advice that I always anyone who knows me has probably heard it a dozen times, just because I don't actually know who told this to me first. But the notion that there are no mistakes, just lessons, and those lessons will be repeated until they are learned. And so we should probably learn them sooner than later.
I like that. I'd heard the first part, but never the part that they're going to continue. I think that's very true. That's great.
Yeah.
So next to the last question, if you could make a request of the people that listen to this podcast, and it's people that love the American West, whether through sports or conservation or art, if you could offer words of wisdom or ask them to do something, is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I'd say, I think I try to remind myself of this, daily. I think listen more, listen harder, and leave space for curiosity. And that involves often withholding judgment and withholding, what you, or at least keeping at bay what you think is your truth until you've listened to other people's truths. And so I think, that notion of cultivating and encouraging curiosity in yourself and in your community, I think that's super important right now.
Yeah, now more than ever. I mean, I think it's always been important, but at this point in history, I think everybody should heed that advice. That's great. So how can people find out more about you, more about Freeflow, social media, websites, all that kind of stuff? Yeah,
for sure. So Freeflow, www.freeflowinstitute.com, pretty easy. And we've got an Instagram and a Facebook. And I don't have an Instagram or a Twitter or anything, but a lot of my work is up and published on the internet, and I'll try to maybe update the Freeflow site with anything new that comes along.
Great. Well, this was so fun. I'm so glad we got introduced. I mean, it's just what you're doing is so perfect for what I'm interested in on this podcast and what everybody that listens to it is. So I really appreciate you taking the time and realize I'm not some creepy dude sending you emails on the internet.
I never thought that, Ed, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for taking an interest.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and thanks for listening to that particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, I've got 3 quick things. Number 1, if you like the podcast, please do me a huge favor. Either pass it along to a friend who may be interested, share it on your social media, and or go to iTunes and give it a 5-star review. All those things would mean a lot to me, and they would really help to spread the word about the podcast. Number 2, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you know that I love reading and I love talking about books. Every other month, I send out a quick email with a few books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The subjects are varied, but they're pretty much all nonfiction with an emphasis on history, biographies, adventure narratives, and topics related to the American West. There are no sales pitches for ranches, no spam, no other kind of nonsense, just books. So if you'd like to sign up for the list, head to Mountain and Prairie/reading, or just go to Mountain and Prairie and there's a massive tab at the top that says book recommendations. Click on it. There are a ton of good books that I've read. Some of the old email lists are on there. You can go crazy. There are a lot of books. And finally, if you know anyone I should interview for the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All my contact info is at mountainandprairie.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have some recommendations and suggestions of interesting people I should meet. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.